Hi, this is Joyce Pellino Crane. I'm the news director here at WestfordCAT, and I have the pleasure today of sitting with State Senator Ed Kennedy. Hi,
Hi,
Senator.
Joyce. I'm happy to be here.
Happy
Thank you for having me.
You oversee the 1st Middlesex District.
Yes.
And what are your communities?
The 1st Middlesex District, in addition to Westford, includes Lowell and Tingsboro, Dunstable and Pepperell, and Groton.
So those are all great towns?
Yes, and it makes it be it's quite a mix. You know, I mean, Lowell is obviously an urban community. You know, Westford and maybe Tingsboro I would describe as more suburban. And then, you know, Dunstable and Pepperell would be, and Groton to some extent, I think, are more rural in nature.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I'm usually in some of those towns frequently for bike trail or, you know, or to go to a restaurant or whatever.
Yes.
And I love the center of Shirley. It's Pepperell. I love, is it Shirley or Pepperell? That has the nice little center with the ice cream stand.
Oh, yes,
yeah.
right, where the rail trail is.
Yes, where the rail trail is. Yeah. I always find the ice cream.
Yeah, okay.
Senator, you began your tenure on January 1st.
Yes.
You beat a field of 5 other candidates, right?
There were 4 others in the primary, and then I had 1 Republican opponent in November.
That's right.
Yeah.
So you really came out on top, and I will say that, you know, when I watched the debates between you, the 5 of you, I thought you always stood out. And
thank you very much.
You're welcome. So you've definitely gotten your toes wet, and beyond that, you are chair, I should say,
yes,
of the Culture, Arts, and Tourism Committee.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, that's a pretty fun committee, really, and it has to do exactly with what it says, and so you involve yourself with community money. I was able to get an additional $2 million into the budget during the last session. Wow. For the Mass Cultural Council, with some accountability built into that extra $2 million, so that they have to explain exactly how they're going to spend it. I don't know if you recall, but back at the beginning of the year, they came under a little bit of scrutiny over an amount of money that they were spending at Davio's on pizza or sandwiches or something like that, which, you know, if you look at an $18 million budget, I mean, the amount of money that they were making a big deal about was about $2,600, which is a very small amount.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I thought that, you know, some accountability needed to be built in there. I think that people expect that, taxpayers expect that, and if you're going to increase their budget by $2 million, in the wake of that Davio's episode, that there needed to be some accountability with that.
That's a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
And so, how did you manifest that? What was the process?
Just you know, during the budget process, I just advocated for it and just you know, filed an amendment and fought for that amendment on the Senate floor, and it was accepted. And so, it's as easy as that. Sometimes it's as easy as that. Sometimes it's not so easy at all.
True. You are also vice chair of the Community Development and Small Businesses Committee.
Yes, the chair of that committee, the Senate chair, is Senator Diana DeZoglio, who's from Methuen, and so, you know, I work closely with her, and we've had you know, we've had different hearings and so forth down, not so much in Lowell, but, you know, down the Merrimack River from there in Lawrence and in Haverhill. But that committee's also has worked out very well, and something that I'm interested in. And then in addition to that, I also serve on several other committees, including elections, the environment, elderly, and municipalities.
All interesting. So
it keeps me busy.
Yeah. What's your day like these days?
The day's pretty busy. I mean, the Senate meets in formal session usually just on Thursday. So that's probably my most important day of the week. On Wednesday, we generally have a Democratic caucus where we'll go over, you know, what's going to happen on Thursday. And so that ends up being a busy day as well. And then a lot of time in the district. It's, you know, I live on the edge of my district actually, and so the furthest part away, the furthest point from my district would be in Pepperell.
Yes.
And that's a 25, 30-minute drive for me. It's you know, it takes a while to get there.
Yeah.
But I've tried to spend a good amount of time in each of the communities in my district, rather than last year during the campaign. One of the criticisms that I heard was that sometimes the state senators just stick with the one district and you only see them on election day. And so I wanted to be sure that that nobody can say that about me. So I've done, you know, what I can to get out to each and every district, and I've been out. I've been in Westford for several different events. We co-hosted, Representative Acero and I co-hosted a cookout at the Senior Center.
Yes.
In Westford back in August, and then in September we were back at the Roden Bush School to award $100,000, which, you know, the credit for that really belongs with Representative Acero, rather than with me. But it's money that will be used for playground equipment for. In at the Nabnasset location and on Main Street, and I guess Frost Street is the
Frost School.
Frost School is
which
the third location.
is around the corner from the Roden Bush Community Center, and that's also Main Street right there.
Yeah.
So when you say you live on the edge of your community, are you talking about the edge of Lowell, which borders Andover?
Yeah, my backyard is in Tewksbury.
Oh, Tewksbury.
So
Okay.
my house is in Lowell, but it's literally on the edge of the district is where I live. So it's quite a ride to Pepperell, but you know, but it's also a pretty pleasant ride, except at 5 o'clock at night.
Yeah, don't go then.
Right.
But it is actually a very pleasant ride. You can even just take. I'm a back road driver a lot, so I take Route 40 into those areas, and it's a beautiful ride.
Yeah, it was, you know, back in the springtime too, when we were talking about the Student Opportunity Act, which was then called the Promise Act, which was going to, you know, change around the funding formula for education. Senator Lewis from Winchester agreed to come out to speak to the school committees and superintendents in the district, and we did that in Groton. And so he had to go from Winchester to Groton, and he still talks about how it was, you know, he really felt like he was going into the hinterland when he was traveling to there. He doesn't get up into my district that much, I guess.
It is funny that Groton is. It seems so close, but then once you start driving it, it's not that close.
Yes.
So, but I love all these communities. I wanted to go over with you some of the accomplishments or bills that you've been involved in or working on. And so let's start with Senate Bill 1692, an act providing property tax relief for older adults.
Yes. So basically now the way it works is most residents that are 65 or older can get a tax deferral. They can enter into a tax deferral program. Excuse me. So the taxes are deferred, and with an interest rate that's usually between 1% and 4%. It could be as high as 8%, but that's up to the local community. However, once that person passes, the heirs are hit right away with 16% increase. So what this legislation will do is to allow a grace period of approximately a year, so that the heirs would have time to dispose of any property or whatever before they had to pay for the taxes without incurring that 16% interest rate. So so I think that that's an important piece, and it's something that you know, people came to us and said, you know, you need to address this. So this piece of legislation would do that.
Let me see if I understand this, though. So if the heirs, when the heirs take over the property, if they're able to sell it before the year is up, would they still pay a 16% tax?
No, they won't. For the first year, they would not have to pay that. But after the first year, if they didn't do anything by the end of the first year, then the 16% would kick in. But up until, and a year should be a sufficient amount of time to probate the estate and dispose of any property that they wish to dispose of.
Yes.
Or at least to organize so that they were able to pay the taxes.
Well, it's definitely a nice move. I've just recently gone through some of this myself. My mother passed in July. So very interested in this particular Senate bill.
Okay.
But moving on, an act reestablishing the Clean Environment Fund.
Right.
Tell us about that.
The Clean Environment Fund was established when the bottle bill was first put into law, and basically the money from the bottle bill went into the Clean Environment Fund. And then in 2008, during the recession, the Commonwealth decided not to do that anymore, so that now that money goes into the general fund and can be spent on anything at all. So what this bill will do is to reestablish that environmental fund, and then municipalities can use that a big chunk of that money for for recycling initiatives, littering, and to take care of those types of environmental problems. And so I just think that that's a better way to use the money rather than to put it in the general fund where it could be used for anything at all.
Right. I almost hesitate to go here, but Westford, the main issue in town for a few months has been meeting the federal mandate for stormwater management. Are other communities complying with the mandate and that you know of? Maybe this is not your area, but I'm wondering what you know about it and whether you know if other communities are complying.
It isn't my area. The problem along the Merrimack River, excuse me, and I've got Tingsboro and Lowell are both along the Merrimack River, but also Lawrence and Haverhill and those other communities. What they have is they've all got sewage treatment plants, but they all have, they're older communities, and so they only have a single sewer system. They really need a dual sewer system. So what happens is, on a day like today, everything's fine, but on a day like the other day or the other night when there's heavy rains, it flushes out those treatment plants, and that raw sewage then ends up in the river. And so, there's, the real solution to that is to create a dual system. And I know in Lowell, and I think in a lot of other communities, when they dig up a street, they're replacing the single system with the dual system. But as you can imagine, you're talking about hundreds of miles of roadways to do that, and so it's very costly.
Yes.
But that's a big issue and something that we need to pay attention to. I think that. The rivers that are in my community, of which there are several, but the Merrimack being the biggest, they're important resources. And the Merrimack, for instance, 600,000 people get their water from there. So it isn't just that it's that it's an important part of the environment, but it's where you get your drinking water. So it's really important to protect it. So I'm not sure if the issue is the same for there, but the money from, and I think maybe what you were going to ask, I'm not sure, is whether or not any of that money could end up going to towards the stormwater issue, and it probably could, but I don't suspect that it would be substantial enough that it would have a tremendous impact. Yes,
as you know, here in Westford, selectmen chose to go with a fee rather than raise the taxes, and so they're working towards outside of the municipal budget, increasing the revenues by $1 million.
Okay.
So about $1.6 million in total will go towards stormwater management.
Okay.
Very hot issue, and town meeting is coming up on October 28th, and there will be some discussion surrounding that. The actual fee has been approved, but what hasn't been approved is the software that's necessary, that's helpful for collecting the fee.
Okay.
So there's a little information about Westford.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about, let's see, Senate Bill 962, an act encouraging the donation of food to persons in need.
Yes.
I love this.
Okay.
I love this one.
There's basically what it does is, there are restaurants that maybe have food at the end of the evening that they could provide to people that are hungry or that need the food, but they're reluctant to do that because of first of all, the liability, and also, and so this would help to change that liability so that they'd be able to donate that food. And another part of the bill also does kind of the same thing for farmers. You know, farmers have excess crops that they could donate as well, but it's extra work for them to do that, so there's not so much incentive to do that.
Yeah.
So what this bill would allow is a tax deduction, so that farmers that do have excess crops would be able to then donate those crops as well.
Wonderful. That's great. I had a garden in Westford's community garden this spring and summer, 15 by 15 plot, which is small.
Yeah.
And I did it with someone else, so I wasn't alone doing it. But what I found out at the end of the summer, I wish I had known earlier, was that any excess produce that we grew that we weren't going to eat, we could leave in the shed. And then someone every week would take the vegetables and bring them to the food pantry.
Okay.
Which I loved.
Yes.
I just thought that was wonderful. I come from a family, I grew up in New York, and my family was in food distribution. They supplied certain types of foods to restaurants and so forth. And I never knew what it was to be hungry. And so for me, I'm always very happy to help with staving off hunger in
Yes.
any community.
Yeah, and I think I think a lot of times we forget that there are people among us that are close that are hungry and that do need the food, and it isn't, in many cases it's the entire family.
Right.
So whereas many families probably in Westford and other communities get 3 meals a day, maybe that's 1 meal a day,
Right.
and that 1 meal a day might come out of a can.
I was
Right.
just going to say that
Yeah.
to you. You watch when you're shopping. Watch who's taking the cans
Yeah.
of soup because they're hungry.
Yeah, yeah.
So I certainly would wish I could do more, and maybe one day I will. Let's see what else we have here. Other Westford events. This is my cheat sheet, which I always need.
Okay.
Yeah, well, we talked about the $100,000 brought to the community, Rodenbush Community Center and the satellite schools. So, additional priorities for you. You were able to advocate during the budget process.
That I think was with the mass cultural for the yes.
Yeah.
But one thing that we didn't talk about, which was is a piece of legislation that that Representative Acero filed, but this year I co-sponsored it with him, so that we're both on the legislation, which would allow for retired police officers to work in schools as security guards.
Yes.
And I think that that's a good idea and something that, if we can do that, I think it would be very helpful. I know in Lowell they just did a home rule petition to let retired police officers work traffic details,
Yeah.
or when there's some construction going on, that they could work those details, which is also a good thing, and maybe a more economical way to go about it. But I think that retired police officers have the training,
Right.
but would not have the arrest powers, and so they would work as sort of security guards in the schools. And I think that would be, I think that's a pretty thoughtful piece of legislation. So I was happy to co-sponsor that with Representative Acero this year.
I think it's a very meaningful option for the schools. And, my children are grown and no longer, in high school, they're beyond college. But I think that parents today, they have so many extra worries.
Yes.
And if that brings peace of mind to the families in the community, it would be, wonderfully justified to have this happen.
Yes, and I think that I think also that's an economical way, but it also, I think it makes people feel a lot safer about sending your kids to school.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly you shouldn't, when you children go off to school, you shouldn't have to worry about whether or not they're going to come back at the end of the day.
Oh my gosh.
And I think
yeah.
that there are some parents that do that because of everything that's been going on in the country for a long time now, way too long.
Totally agreed. One thing I've noticed about you is that you are a great listener.
Thank you.
You really do truly listen. And I remember, I mean, you've been here once before, and I remember feeling so comfortable interviewing you. And I have that same feeling right now because I think that I feel like I'm being heard.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit, tell Westford a little bit about your background?
Sure. I'm still a city councilor in Lowell and will be until the end of the year. So I've got, maybe, I don't know, maybe 6 more meetings left for that. That's been manageable for me, but it makes my life pretty busy.
Yeah.
So I enjoyed my time on the Lowell City Council, but I won't really be sorry when I can just be totally focused on the Senate and not the City Council at all. But I served 2 years as mayor in Lowell, and the mayor in Lowell is I guess the president of the City Council and the chairman of the school committee.
Wow.
And the ceremonial head for the city. So I did during that time, I did a lot of ribbon cuttings and that type of thing. But also, the 2 years that I spent on the school committee, I think was really, was an eye-opener for me. I had never really, to be quite honest about it, I had never seen a Lowell School Committee meeting until I became the mayor. And so the first school committee meeting that I went to, I ended up being the chairman of the school committee.
Oh, whoops.
But yeah, so it was a trial by fire, but it worked out pretty well. And I thought that, and I learned a lot, and I think we got a lot done during that time. So, that was rich to me. I've done actually 2 different segments, 2 different times on the Lowell City Council. I was first elected to the City Council when I was 26. And I served 4 terms then, and then I served 2 terms as a Middlesex County Commissioner. And then after that, I took a hiatus for about, 17 or 18 years. And then in 2011, I decided to run for the City Council again. And, I was, my kids had grown older and so forth, and I was able to win and then become mayor for 2016, 2017. And then Eileen Donahue became the city manager in Lowell, and so that opened up the Senate seat, and so I ran for that last year. And as we mentioned earlier, that was a pretty spirited and competitive primary, which is a good thing.
Yes, it truly was.
Yeah. Yes.
And it is a good thing.
Yes, and so here I am, and but I do really, I'm enjoying my time in the Senate quite a bit. It's a little bit different in this regard. I think it's a pretty congenial group, and I think part of that is, or what's a little bit different for me, is that none of the senators compete with each other really, because they all have different districts.
Yeah.
Whereas, what I'm used to in local government with the City Council, everybody does compete to some extent. And so that's a little bit different, but that's been a good thing. But it's, I've found, the senators are very helpful if you're a newer senator, and so that's all worked out well. And I've had several senators have come up into the district for different reasons. I think I mentioned that Jason Lewis came up to talk about the educational bill. Yeah. And then Senator Pacheco from Taunton came up as well to speak about climate change. And so everybody's really, I really like that part of it. I think that everybody gets along, and I think it's as long as you get along with other people, then you can do well in the Senate.
Do you have any short range or long range goals in this position?
Well, the Senate did just pass the educational bill, which was which was an issue last year during the race, and I think something that's really very important. I think the House will take that up next week, and then there'll probably be a conference to iron out any differences between the 2 versions, the House and the Senate version. But I'm very, very confident that there is going to be a change to the funding formula for education, which I think is important for everybody, and it probably favors the gateway cities more than anything else.
Lawrence and Lowell.
Lawrence, Lowell, and Brockton, and places that have extraordinary challenges with the student population. Yeah. But every community in my district will benefit somewhat from it. So that's a good thing. And I think the amount of money for Westford will be when it's fully implemented, which is it's not like it will happen next year. It will feather in over 7 years. But at full implementation, I think it'll be more than $1 million in additional money for the community of Westford.
Wow, that's significant.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a good thing, and that's something, I've been really happy and proud to be in the Senate during that time. I think that's a landmark legislation. The funding formula has been something that a lot of educators have complained about for decades.
Decades, yes.
And it's it's been the way it's been since 1993, and it clearly doesn't work for a lot of communities. And so what you have, I think, in just about every community is you have the school committee and the Board of Selectmen or the City Council or whatever, fighting over money.
Yeah.
And really, there just should be more money coming from Beacon Hill than what there is. They shouldn't have to be fighting over dollars, and which is more important, to a fire truck or a school addition or a new gym or whatever.
Agreed. Yeah. I've covered these towns, some of your towns actually, for I don't know, about 10 years in the past, and I know I witnessed and wrote about some of those.
Yeah.
Some of that push and pull that went on in the towns. We only have a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask if there's anything you would like to say to the Westford community. I want them to know.
I guess only that, I'm in there every day and trying as hard as I can, and I think I'm doing a good job, and we've got legislation I think that meets the needs of just about every community. And I think that during the past budget session, we were able to get money for a lot of communities. I'm not sure that we got anything specifically for Westford, but for instance, in Groton, we were able to get put into the budget about $90,000 for a backup generator for their senior center, which was something that they were looking for.
Yeah.
We were able to get money in for improvements in Pepperell, traffic improvements in Pepperell and Tingsboro. And I also, maybe we didn't have it. We should have spent a little time on this. Maybe we can do it another time. But I was able to get $100,000 into the budget for a study for a STEM building for Middlesex Community College, which is something that services a lot of kids from every community in my district.
Absolutely.
And I think that STEM is just so important, and to have a STEM building at Middlesex Community College, I think would be great. Everybody isn't going to go to college. There are some kids that choose not to, but if you can go for 2 years or get a strong STEM background, you can still get a really good paying job. And so I think that that's important, and would serve a lot of the students in the First Middlesex District.
Well, let's talk about it again in another few months.
Okay.
Would you come back?
Absolutely.
We love having you.
Okay, I love being here.
So thank you very much
Okay.
for coming today,
All right, Joyce.
Senator.
All right, thank you.
For WestfordCAT News, this is Joyce Pellino Crane. See you around town.